And I'm going to start with just a quick overview of what we went over on Wednesday.
Savannah,
Yeah,
let me ask you something. You remember that the sidebar that you couldn't click on WordPress? Did you figure that out? Or
I
I don't.
think so. I
Okay.
think so. Yeah, because
I,
that's really important. That's some
I
important
was like,
stuff
I
that I
need
needed
an
to show you. So,
explanation for that
yeah,
one. Okay.
I've
It-
I tried a different approach using an incognito window because in the regular Chrome browser, it adds all these extensions and everything. In the incognito one, it doesn't. So I tried that with a Zoom meeting open, and it was working okay. So I'm trusting that it will continue to work okay.
Okay.
But yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, so we talked on Wednesday. We talked about the difference between an auto install of WordPress and a manual install. And a couple of you really wanted to walk through a manual install. So we're definitely going to do that today. We talked about the difference between a page and a post, and we went through the basics of how to add a page or a post, and the process is, pretty similar. And then how to publish it or how to schedule it to publish at a later time. We went through the steps of adding a plugin, and we set up the security plugin I recommend, which is all-in-one WP Security and Firewall. And we added a theme and talked about the difference between using a standalone theme and a theme framework with a child theme. So before we go any further, does anyone have any questions about any of those? Anne, if you've got questions, you can type them in.
Well, I am going to have questions, but I don't have my questions. I want to go through the notes and stuff again.
Okay.
And because I don't really know about the child theme and all that, so I want to go through what you sent me first and see if I understand, and then I'll on Monday.
Okay. That makes sense? Okay. Trouble with this chat box is you can't see. They don't show you if somebody's typing something, so I don't know if Anne's trying to type something or not. But if a question pops up, we'll just, well, once I share my screen, I can't see a question. So, okay, now one thing I did want to remind everybody of, this was something that Robert brought up in the Mighty Networks forum last night. He posted a message because he kept getting an error when he was trying to go to his WordPress dashboard and logged in. And he was pretty sure he had installed it correctly, but he couldn't access it. Well, it was because he never took the previous step, which was to direct his domain name servers, his DNS, to his new hosting account. So once he got that squared away, then boom, there it was, just the way it's supposed to be. So that's a really important step, and you should do it before you even install WordPress, because it does take time to propagate. Now, when I was showing you last week, was it last week? Wednesday, I forget. uh, Using Namecheap, it redirected to SiteGround very quickly, just in a matter of a couple of minutes. And sometimes that happens, but sometimes it can take a few hours. Sometimes, they warn you it can take up to 48 hours. And in the past, I've known it to take even longer, although today it's usually much quicker than that. But it's a good idea to, as soon as you set up your hosting account, to go ahead and set up the DNS redirection right away before you install WordPress. And then hopefully by the time you get WordPress installed, it's all set and you can actually access it. And Robert just came in. Hey, Robert.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Okay, I have to search around a lot to find how to get in here, but
okay.
Here we are.
Well, we just quickly reviewed what we went over on Wednesday, and I was just talking about the situation you encountered yesterday with the DNS, and reminding everyone that it's a good idea to redirect your DNS as soon as you have your hosting account set up, before you even install WordPress, so that it has time to propagate. And hopefully is ready for you by the time you're ready to do something with it.
Well, you saw that I was up, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it must be there, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, all right, okay.
Okay. So, what I'm going to start with today is I'm going to go through a manual WordPress install. This is something, if you aren't interested in manually installing WordPress, you can go, get a cup of coffee or something, come back in 10 or 15 minutes. But there were several people who wanted to see all the steps for a manual install. So we're going to do that. I'm going to mute everybody now so we don't get background noise. If you do have a question, certainly you can, unmute yourself and ask your question, because once I share my screen, I can't see the chat box. So, and since Ann can't talk with us today, since she can only put things in chat, Nandi, maybe you could help me out. If she does have a question while I'm screen sharing, could you read it out for me?
I will do that.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, so let me go ahead and get ready to share my screen.
What lesson will this be in the docs?
What lesson will this be in the notes? That's a good question. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay, well, the last one is lesson 6, site security.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then this will probably be B7.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So hopefully now you see my screen, which is the WordPress.org homepage. So the first thing that you need to do in order to manually install WordPress is to actually download the software. So you go to this page, which is just WordPress.org, and you click this button, Get WordPress, and download WordPress 4.9.8. So you get that as a zip file. So I have downloaded that. The next thing you need to do is you need to go to your hosting account and you need to create a database and create a user for that database. Now, I'm in my actual account here because the testing account that I set up when we started the class was the smallest account. It only allows one site, so they won't let me set up another database. So this is my real account. And just for demonstration purposes today, I'm going to use a domain that I'm not currently using, just so that we have something to fool around with. But I can show you all the steps for setting up the database. Now, you go to your cPanel and you scroll down until you get to this databases menu. And then they have this nice little MySQL database wizard. So you click on that and it tells you to create a wizard. Now, notice that it says new database, and then it gives you this weird name, and then an underscore, and then a blank space where you type in. The first part of it is actually the name that's on your hosting account. And usually that's the first few letters of the first domain that you set up with them. So in this case, when I set up this SiteGround hosting account, I was using the domain bizcopywriter.com. So that's why you have this BIZCOPYW underscore. But for the name of the database here, I'm just going to put in class. Now, if this were something that I was going to keep, I would make it a little more complicated. I would throw a number in there or some something just to make it a little harder to crack if somebody's trying to mess around. But anyway, you put it in, click next step. Okay, now it takes you right to the screen to create a user. So for the user, I'm going to say, kind of bits and pieces of my name. Okay, now password. Yeah, I should have had this up ahead of time. Normally, I would go and get a password from this site that I like called Generate Passwords. So I'm doing that now. I don't think you can see this because you should be seeing just the screen with the database. But I opened up another window and I'm doing it quickly there. Okay. So there's my password. And then I click Create User. Now, in this case, you want to click All Privileges. Privileges are the things that the database will allow this particular user to do. So think about it being like having an all access pass to something as opposed to just being able to read it but not comment on it, or whatever the various levels of activity are. In this case, you're setting up the database for WordPress, and WordPress has to be able to access all parts of the database. So you just click All Privileges at the top, and then Next Step. And it shows you this success message that this user now has privileges on this database. Okay? And then you can add another database, add another user, or return home. And I'm just going to return home. Okay, and I have to quickly make a note of what this password was because I'm going to need it later. All right. So you've got your database and you've got your database user. So the next thing is to go to your file that you just downloaded. And there are two ways to do this. There's a way that WordPress recommends, and that is to go to this file. It's a zip file. Can you all see this? I forgot I was going to be doing this when I set up the screen share. Hang on, let me stop the share and set it up a different way so that you can see additional screens, because I don't think you're going to be able to see that if I don't. So let's see. Okay, so I'm starting to share again, and I'm just setting it so that you can see everything that I'm doing. Okay, so here's this file that I just downloaded. It's you can see it's WordPress 4.9.8, and it's a zip file. I'm going to unzip it, and I'm going to open it up. There's a file in here that we need to modify, and this is wp-config-sample.php. Now, In order to modify this file, you're going to need to have what we call a text editor. If you do it in Word, Word is going to throw all kinds of garbage into it that's going to mess up the coding. So you have to have a text file. If you're using Windows, there's a text editor. If you're on a Mac, I downloaded a free software called BBEdit, which is what I use, but you have to make sure that you're using a text editor, okay? And you can see there's a lot of stuff here that probably doesn't mean anything to you, but the parts that you need to be concerned with are in here and just down below that. So here where it says define, and then it says, quote, DB_name, end quote, okay, and database name here, this is where you put the name of the database that you just created. So that's the name of the database that I just created. The database user. And then the password. Okay, now, when you're on SiteGround, this next one, DB_host, you can leave that at localhost. Some hosting companies will have you put something different in there. This next one, the character set, you can leave that alone. The next one you can leave alone. And then you come to what they call authentication keys and salts. So notice they say define, and then they have this gibberish, and then put your unique phrase here. The simplest way to get this information is there's actually a site on the web that creates these for you. And oops, that's not the right link. There we go. I'm going to put this link in the show notes once I stop saving my screen. But it creates these keys and salts for you. And I pulled this one up earlier. I'm just going to refresh it now so that it gives me something different. And then I'm going to highlight everything on here and copy it and then paste it back in this document. So to copy, if you're on a Mac, it's Control-C, or rather Command-C. If you're on Windows, it's Control-C. And then do the same thing here. Highlight all of this. And I'm just going to hit Command-V. And on a Windows, it would be Control-V to paste in what I just copied from that page. Okay? Now, the next thing is the WordPress database table prefix. And this is something you can leave alone or you can change. It's completely up to you. One of the things that hackers look for if they're going after WordPress specifically, and WordPress is a target because it's so popular, you know, because there's so many sites built on WordPress, you know, it becomes kind of a target. So anytime they see and there are lots of ways that anybody, and if you're curious, I can show you, it's very easy, that anybody can see the actual code behind a web page. Now that doesn't mean that you can view, you know, passwords and stuff, but the actual HTML and PHP language and the other programming languages that construct the page, anybody can view those if they want to. So if somebody sees this WP_ prefix on a page, they know, boom, okay, this is a WordPress site. So you can change that WP if you want to something else. You can change it here, or you can change it in the all-in-one WP security plugin that I told you about. Either way is fine. You just need to, if you change it here, you need to remember that you've done it, because that'll make a difference later. So that is all you have to do. And then you're going to save this as instead of wp-config-sample, you're going to save it as just wp-config.php. Okay. Now, if you've done that correctly, assuming you've done that correctly, you're good to go. Now, even though you just had to unzip this file and add wp-config, when you actually upload WordPress to your hosting server, you need to do it as a zip file. So at this point, you can either re-zip all this stuff, or I'm going to show you a different way, which I think is a little quicker and easier. Now, the next step, in order to do the next step, we need to use an FTP client. I happen to use one called FileZilla. And I'm going to show you, hang on just a second, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute here and pull up a different window. Hey, Ruth, I didn't hear you come in. Hi. Let's see, FileZilla. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing now. Okay, so this is FileZilla, and it's filezilla-project.org, and it's free. It's very easy to use. It's one that I recommend. So you just go to this page and you click Download FileZilla Client. You need to make sure you choose the client and not the server, because the server is something completely different. So download the client, and it'll take you to another page. Now, it recognizes that I'm on a Mac, so it's giving me the choice for the Mac version at the top. But it also shows me other platforms available. So down here, I don't know if you can see, it's pretty tiny. There's Windows 64, Windows 32, and this is the symbol for Linux. So depending on what platform you use, you click the appropriate one and download it and install it. And I'm not going to go through the steps for downloading and installing it, because it's, you know, software. So however you download and install software on your computer, that's how you do it. Now, once you have it installed, this is what it looks like when you open it up. Now, the left-hand side shows you what's on your computer. And I'm going to navigate here to my downloads, if I can find them. There we go. Okay. And okay, so there's the WordPress file that I unzipped, but I don't want that. I want the zipped version. And where did it go? There we go. Okay. So that's what I'm going to be uploading. Now, you're going to get instructions from your hosting company on how to set this up. Do you want to look at those now, or do you want to just go ahead and I'll install WordPress and then we'll backtrack to that? What would you prefer? Anybody?
Backtrack.
Backtrack? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So we'll just plow ahead here and then we'll backtrack. So remind me so that I don't forget. Okay. So I already have this set up. So I'm going to connect. And as soon as I'm connected, you'll see all this stuff appear on the right. Now, at the top here, it actually shows you the steps that it's going through. It tells you it's establishing a connection, initializing TLS, verifying certificate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The first time you use it, it's going to look a little bit different, and I'll show you that when we do the backtrack. What you're looking for over here is you are looking for public_HTML. That is the folder where your WordPress is going to be installed. Okay, so you're going to open that up. Oops. Okay, now you can see this, because this is my actual account, I have a number of things in here, and this is the one that we're using for testing today. So excuse me just a second, I need to take a sip of tea. I'm sorry about the confusion. I just changed my mind. I just decided that we're going to install directly from the unzipped file. And it'll take a couple of minutes. But this way we don't have to mess around with that other file that I modified. It's just automatically going to go in. And remember, I've told you a couple times that with WordPress, there's usually more than one way to do things. Well, there's more than one way to do things here too.
Susanna,
Yes.
would you tell us why you chose to do the unzipped version? Because I thought I remembered you saying to upload the zipped version.
Well, you can do it both ways. And here's my thinking. And this is totally up to you. Depending on how you have your computer set up, it may be very easy to zip and unzip folders, or it may require a few different steps. Now, I'm on a Mac, so they make it very easy for me.
Yeah.
On Windows, it's not always so easy. Again, depending on your individual setup, because it can vary all over the map. I'm kind of assuming that you probably already know how to do that on your own system, whereas unzipping it after you've uploaded it to the server is another step. And right now you're being hit with a lot.
Yes. Okay. Just to understand. And
Sure, absolutely.
thank you.
You're welcome.
This is the time when the old programmers would go off and make a pot of coffee and get a cup.
Yep. Fortunately, it doesn't take that long to upload anymore. It seems like a long time because we're sitting here waiting for it, but it's really pretty quick.
Oh, yeah. Things have changed an awful lot since I first got introduced to computers.
Yep. They have indeed. When did you start computing, Ruth?
Grad school at UT Knoxville. So let me see, that would have been about 79 or 80.
Oh, good for you. Okay.
I was seeing that I went for library science.
Okay.
And I was seeing that computers were starting to get into libraries.
Mm-hmm.
I knew nothing about them really, other than what we'd been introduced to in our library science classes. So since the guy I was dating was in computer science, I asked my advisor what would be a good class to take to get me familiar.
Mm-hmm.
He sent me to a Fortran class. I've never programmed in Fortran after that class, but it taught me a lot about how a human has to think when dealing with a computer.
Mm-hmm.
And it really helped me in writing procedural manuals.
I'm sure, yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm not a programmer. I never have been. I took a couple of classes back in the day and decided that it was something I could force myself to learn to do, but why would I want to inflict that much misery on myself? So
Yes, I totally agree. I've become, I'm told I'm a high-end user because I actually understand bits,
mm-hmm.
and I have learned how to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about my husband dragging me kicking and screaming into the computer age because he kept bringing home new computers and new programs, and I'd just be starting to get used to one when he'd switch. And I'd have to ask him, okay, how do I do X? And after getting the history and theory of computing, I'd ask again, okay, how do you do X? And I'd tell me one step at a time. And I'd make him stop and I'd write it down. In the process, I learned how to deal with computers, and he learned how to talk to non-geeks.
Uh-huh.
So it worked, but it took a while. It was frustrating.
Sure. Yep. Well, my husband is totally non-technical, and he has this amazing ability to crash anything in ways that nobody can figure out how it happened. Two of my sons are programmers, and I used to call them and say, "You'll never guess what your father just did." And I would tell them what happened, and they would just be shaking their heads and saying, "Yep, he's got a unique gift."
And it's something that has to be learned and worked around.
Mm-hmm.
One of my library jobs was involved with taking care of a battery of computers with different programs in a business library setting, and getting people who had no background into that program get what they want and get out, which
Mhm.
meant I dealt a lot with, I'm afraid I'm going to break it.
Mhm.
So a lot of reassurance and hand-holding, but taught me an awful lot in the process.
Yep.
And sooner or later, I've used whatever I've learned somewhere else. Like right now.
Mhm. So we're just about done here.
Okay, then it's time for me to mute again.
Okay. All right, so we're finished. And so I'm going to disconnect from the server. And whoops. Okay, so this is something that happens when we do a manual install. This occasionally occurs. And when that happens, first thing to check is to make sure that I entered the database and username correctly. No, I don't want to create a database. I want to look at databases. Okay. I entered it incorrectly. Okay, so I go back here and I reconnect. And I go back to public_HTML. And now I go back to this file that I created. And I can right click on it and select View Edit. And it will pull up the file where I can modify it. And let me just double check that. There we go. Yep. Okay. All right. So then I'm going to save it and close it. And now FileZilla pops up this message to me that says a previously opened file has been changed. Do I want to upload this file back to the server? And I say yes. And hopefully that will have solved the problem. Now, let's refresh this page. Ta-da! Okay, so at this point, it asks me to choose my language, which is English United States, and then it wants some information. So the site title is just nonsense. My username is going to be Susanna P. And now here's something that's important if you're doing a manual install. Search engine visibility. Definitely check this, discourage search engines from indexing this site, because you don't want them indexing the site while you're working on it. This doesn't it doesn't force them not to index it, but it tells them that you don't want them to. And then later on, you go back, obviously, and unclick it when you're ready for them to start looking at it. Click Install WordPress. And there you go. So I'm not going to bother logging in here because I just wanted to show you how to set it up. But that is how you do a manual install. Okay, did I successfully stop the screen sharing? I guess I did. Can you all see me now instead of the screen? Okay. All right, so questions?
Since you said early on not to do that.
Okay, Rob, can you speak up a little?
Since early on, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Not to do this, other than from the control perspective. What's the purpose of it?
More control. For example, when I mentioned that you can change the WP prefix for the database tables, you can do that when you're doing a manual install. When you're doing a manual install, there are some other things that you have more control over, like the secret keys and salts, which is that whole, big chunk of gobbledygook that I took off that website and copied into the config file. On some hosts, I've heard, I don't know if this is true or if this is just rumor, but it's certainly something to be aware of. On some hosts, if you do the auto install, they use the same keys and salts for everybody's, which means that they're basically worthless. So if you do a manual install, you can make sure that you have an individual set of keys and salts. Now, if you've done an auto install, you can go back and you can, using an FTP program like I just showed you, you can go back and you can manually change that WP config file, putting in your own. But I just, I'm a control freak. What can I say? I like to do it manually. So there's nothing wrong with an auto install. That's not a problem. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Okay, anything else? Okay, well, let me...
Thank you for answering my question about what to do if you did the auto install and wanted to change something.
Oh, okay.
That's great.
Yeah, pre-answered questions. Don't you love them?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording for a minute and get set up to show you the FTP setup part of the thing that we said we were going to backtrack to. So hang on. Let me just